Instead, he smashed to the ground from 60 feet up at 70 miles an hour. 23-year-old Seth Enslow had a worldwide reputation for his daring jumps. Crash after crash, he always managed to get up and get right back on his bike.
He's like the 21st century Evel Knievel. The thing that drove everyone to want to watch Evel Knievel was the fact that you never knew if he was going to live or die. You know what I mean? This is a guy that you knew was playing Russian roulette.
On December 22nd, 1999, on a dirt road in Apple Valley, California, Seth's friends had spent days setting up the jump course. Seth would try to break the world record for motorbike distance jumping, 251 feet. Seth started his practice jumps at a distance of 120 feet.
How'd you like that one?
Scary as usual.
Seth's girlfriend, Christy Larson, was a little anxious. But Seth grew more confident as the distance grew. In 20-foot increments, he built up to jumping 200 feet. Fellow jumper and EMT, Josh Richling, was there to rescue if necessary.
Didn't get to the size that he wanted it to get to because unfortunately in the high desert the winds come up in the late afternoon.
At 60 feet in the air, even the smallest amount of wind could push Seth off course and cause a crash landing. Seth's world record attempt would have to wait until the next day.
Unfortunately, the next morning didn't prove to be a whole lot better. The wind direction had changed. Instead of coming from the side of the direction that Seth was jumping, it was coming from behind him.
Eager to get on with it, Seth made a risky decision. With a wind behind him and the ramp set up for 200 feet, his plan was to work his way to the target distance of 251.
He would now be jumping for his first attempt a distance that he wasn't familiar with because he hadn't jumped it yet.
And all of a sudden you just hear him coming from out of nowhere. Nobody was even in place really yet. And you just heard everyone, oh my God, grab your cameras, he's going, he's going.
When he took his right foot off the peg and he started to shake it, I knew there was a problem. It seemed to me that he was trying to almost backpedal in the air to try and slow the bike down in the air.
With a tailwind pushing him forward, Seth overshot the landing ramp.
When Seth landed almost to the very, very bottom of the landing ramp, his bike and his body took all of the impact. His head struck the bars. He then immediately went into a fetal position, and I knew at that point that he was already unconscious. He stayed on his bike for another second and then fell off the side. The bike kept going and tumbling, and so did he.
Ambulance! He's coming, he's coming.
He was breathing very fast, very deep, and with that, he wasn't breathing out of his nose or mouth, he was breathing out of his forehead. The air just finds the path of least resistance, and that happened to have been the hole in his forehead was much bigger than the hole in his nose or mouth. The blood and the air that was coming out of his forehead was very similar to that of a whale when they breathe, with the mist coming up. We knew that he had ruptured the outer part of his skull, which exposed the sinuses underneath.
What the paramedics didn't know was the extent of the damage and how Seth's brain had taken the impact. They were also concerned about a potential spinal injury. They struggled to hold Seth down as he tried to get up.
Seth, don't get up! Do not get up, buddy, okay? Do not get up.
With the help of Seth's friends, Josh and his partner were able to get Seth into a C-collar.
He had such severe head damage and just blood being everywhere. It was awful.
After getting Seth onto a backboard and into an ambulance, EMTs raced to meet the Mercy Air helicopter that would fly Seth to the nearest trauma center.
Be advised, we are inbound to your facility. We have about a 1 to 2 minute ETA to land on the helipad. We have a 24-year-old male from a stunt motorcycle jump, and he's complaining of severe pain.
Seth was conscious when he arrived at Arrowhead Regional Medical Center in Colton. In the ER, doctors evaluated Seth's injuries. X-rays revealed a broken collarbone, but amazingly, no spine damage. However, the bone above his right eye socket was shattered.
It was essentially crushed like a shell of a hard-boiled egg. The force required to sustain a frontal sinus fracture is approximately 2 to 3 times the force required to fracture the maxillary bone or the mandible.
Do not move your
The frontal sinus serves several functions. One of those is to form a crush zone between the forehead and the brain, and exactly as a car crush zone, crumple zone would be to prevent injury to the occupants. In this case, the occupant is Seth's brain.
A CAT scan found no evidence of brain injury, but Seth would need surgery to repair the frontal sinus fracture.
If left unrepaired, the dimension between the front of Seth's face and his brain would be very thin, and the risk of re-injury in that area with brain damage would be significant.
Seth needed surgery, but his head was too swollen to operate on. Instead, doctors sutured the gash and waited for the swelling to go down. 5 days later, Seth was prepped for surgery. To get at Seth's broken sinus bone, Dr. Maurer would peel his face down to the fracture.
The incision is essentially placed in the hairline. The incision is through 4 of the 5 layers of the scalp, and then that allows that tissue to be brought down in one large sheet to allow complete access to the entire frontal sinus. When the bones are repaired, the fragments are repositioned as the pieces of a puzzle. They are connected together with small titanium plates and screws, and those are attached then to the stable portion of the front of Seth's skull.
The 4-hour surgery was a complete success, and recovery was painful for a few days. But the pain of his injury was not as bad as the disappointment of not breaking the world record.
You know right away, as soon as you leave the takeoff ramp, you know whether you're good or bad. I knew right away I was going too fast, and I was going to go right past my landing ramp and land from in the air above the telephone poles all the way down to flat ground with no hill to land on to ease my fall. And I was just going to stick like a ton of bricks.
Seth had underestimated the intensity of the tailwind.
The wind that you measure on the ground is a lot different than the wind 50 feet above the telephone poles. And I should have moved the ramp back to the gap that I hit the day before and hit it at the same speed, just to make sure the weather conditions and the winds and everything were still going to put me at the same distance that it did the day before. I didn't. I just wanted to keep going. I said, well, we've already moved up this far. Now how fast I hit the one yesterday, so we'll just add 4 miles an hour to that speed that I hit yesterday, and we'll go for it. And I did, and it was just too much. Next thing you know, I'm flying through the air, figuring out how I'm going to land this without killing myself. I landed so hard, took my vision away for a second, and blood was all in the lenses of my goggles, so natural instinct was just to put my hands up like that in front of my face, like, what the heck just hit me? And when I did that, I dipped off the side of the motorcycle, and that's how I broke my collarbone, because my shoulder was the first thing to hit when I hit the ground.
4 weeks later, against his doctor's advice, Seth was back on his bike.
I jumped 175 feet in the Houston Astrodome. My collarbone was still broken. I could still feel it floating around in there. It hadn't healed all the way, but I had to jump.
Oh, this way?
Seth and Christy now have a 3.5-year-old daughter, Kylie. But even in his new role as a dad, he's still a rider at heart.
I've been living my dream for the last decade. Flying through the air, it's freedom. You know, you get a little taste of what birds feel.
Seth still intends to finish what he started back in December 1999.
My goal is still to break the world record, because I don't like to quit or give up. If I start something, I like to finish it and see it all the way through. It's just the way I am.
Coming up, in a moment of distraction, a surgeon's hand is sucked into a saw blade.